Hi and welcome to this presentation, An Introduction to Critical Thinking. So by the end of this session, we'll really be looking for you to be able to explain the purpose of critical thinking, analyse those main components of critical thinking and evaluate the purpose of critical thinking. So in terms of definition, critical thinking is all about asking questions. It's about asking what, who, where, why, when, how. And by asking these questions, you can fulfil the requirements of your own learning objectives, which may be set for you or through assignments, or they may be personally agreed ones with your lecturers, which can help you describe, analyse, apply, reason, reflect, critique, or evaluate, for example. Stella Cottrell, with her book Critical Thinking Skills from 2011, the references at the end of this presentation, is a brilliant book, and Cottrell argues that critical thinking is a cognitive process that's associated with the mind. And thinking critically, analytically and evaluatively does use mental processes such as attention, categorization, selection and judgment. Cottrell extends this further and explains that critical thinking is a complex process which requires a wide range of skills and attitudes. For example, it includes identifying other people's positions, arguments and conclusions. And this really means that you need to look at a range of different people's work. You'll be evaluating the evidence for alternative points of view. So again, having that range of different points of view there from your reading. You'll be weighing up opposing arguments and evidence fairly to ensure that you're objective with your work as much as possible. You really need to encourage you to be able to read between the lines, seeing behind those surfaces, understanding if there's anything that's perhaps really doesn't ring true, perhaps there's stereotypes attached or unfair assumptions being made. You'll be recognising techniques used to make certain positions more appealing than others, such as using false logic or persuasive devices. We're reflecting on issues in a structured way, bringing logic and insight to the fore. And a really important part of this is also drawing conclusions about whether your arguments that you present are valid, they're justifiable, and they're really based on good evidence. And again, if you've got a range of credible sources to add gravitas to your argument, then it's more likely that your argument will be more persuasive. So you'll be synthesising information, so drawing together your own judgments through the use of the evidence and synthesising this to form your own new position. And by doing that, you'll come up to conclusions there as well. And when you do present a point of view, they're going to make sure that you do it in a structured, clear and well-reasoned way that will convince others to agree with your argument. So there are a range of different questions, and we're going to go for three. And the first type of questions are describing questions. This is quite low level in thinking skills, but really important to set the scene. So here you're defining the subject, exploring the purpose by providing some background information. You might explain some terminology, for example, and define the parameters for the context for which you're writing about, and state who or what is involved and perhaps when or where it's relevant. Moving forward though, the majority of your assignments and works that you'll be working on in higher education will be working on analysis. So here, through analysis, you'll be exploring how something works and what influences it. You'll start to understand how it relates to other parts, so using those different perspectives so you can build that whole perspective. You'll start to understand relationships between different perspectives or different factors or features, and comparing and contrasting those two. You may also be explaining the advantages and limitations. In terms of analysis, you usually set what type of analysis you need to do, but these are core components of what's included. Once you have done your analysis, you move on to evaluation. And here, this is a higher order thinking skill where you start to make judgments. You start to understand the implications of something that you're exploring, explaining perhaps what's been learned overall through making your conclusions. You make predictions perhaps from your argument that you presented, making inferences, providing solutions or recommendations. Now, those may be for practice as well, and you'll really be making conclusions based on the analysis that you've been doing. So we're going to look at each of those in turn shortly. But it's important to just reinforce that throughout you'll be encouraged to build an argument. So that's a position by synthesising a range of sources and perspectives to add gravitas to your knowledge and your argument. So that's really important to bear in mind. Critical thinking isn't just used in academia. It's a skill that we develop in academia to ensure that you are prepared for the workforce. So it doesn't really matter what type of role you go into. There's usually decisions that need to be made, often quite critical decisions that need to be made in a short period of time, or perhaps longer projects that you might be working on. You might be working with members of the public, or you might be thinking about how best to improve something in your workplace, for example. But throughout those skills of critical thinking, of asking questions, exploring why, how, what influences things, are all really, really important in the workforce, and is an important transferable skill that employers are looking for from career graduates. So I'm going to introduce you the model to generate critical thinking. This has been worked with the University of Plymouth, for which we give credit to, and Learn Higher as well. We've got the link at the end of the presentation with regards to our references. But what they do is talk about description, analysis and evaluation, and give type of questions in each of these, as you will see here. And we'll give you some examples. So what we're going to look at is, first of all, we're going to look at questions for description, describing. So just a quick reminder here, we're defining the subject, we're exploring that purpose, maybe using some background information, maybe use some terminology if it's appropriate, and define the parameters for which you are writing about. You'll state who or what is involved, and perhaps when or where it is relevant. So typical questions that you will be addressing, and you address these through your reading, and then address those in your writing. Obviously, we're not going to ask a specific question in the writing, you're just going to address it. But typical questions that you would ask yourself to pose a good position for your wider reading and assignment preparation is what it's about, what's the context, what's the situation, what's the main point that you're discussing, or problem or topic that's explored. Often you're given that from the outset. As you progress through 3 years, you may be looking at your own topic, for example. You think about where does it take place, who are the key instigators, for example, who's it by, or who are involved, who are the main writers, for example, if any seminal authors, who's affected, who might be interested, and when does it occur. So let's give an example here. I think what's also really important to bear in mind is you're not going to address all of those questions, but these are some of the typical ones that you would include. So in our description example, what I've done is taken some extracts to describe research, and Kumar, we're using Kumar's book here as an extract, and Kumar here, it considers the term research within the social sciences as a way of thinking, as well as a set of skills. Research is characterised by exploring questions to a research question. Moreover, research is an integral part of good professional practice in many professions, and you'll be able to see from this how we've used references here as well. If I've spoken too quite quickly, then of course feel free to pause the video and go back over it. Let's see how the description occurs. So first of all, we've got our who. So who, we've got Kumar. We've got when, we've got our date here. You might have historical perspectives, and you might have a range of dates there. What is it? So one of those questions here, well, we're talking about research, and we've defined our parameters of where is it used. Here we've defined it as social sciences. Obviously research can happen in the humanities, in the creative arts, etc. So defining your parameters is really helpful here. And in terms of defining our parameters even further, we've talked about it links to good professional practice here. So all of this information is really important for the reader to take on board. It is using those lower thinking skills, but it's really important nonetheless. But what we're going to encourage you to do is move towards those analytical questions once you've set the scene. So here you'll be exploring how something works, what influences it, and understanding how the different perspectives relate to each other, how you can create a whole, and understand those relationships through comparing, contrasting, looking for those similarities and differences, and explaining the advantages and limitations, for example. Now what you'll see here is a range of questions that you may address, whatever's obviously appropriate. So we look at that first one, how did this occur? And what's really important here is these extension questions. We're talking about the why, what influenced this, and what else. So it's really important to think about when you say, how does something occur? The next question would be, okay, well, why did it occur? Were there things that influenced it? And in terms of possible influences, if you move over to the right-hand side, in any type of topic, there are a range of different influences. So there'll be ones that are personal to the subject that you're learning, but there are other possible influences which could include legislative influences, policies, changes in policies, for example, resources available, linking to economics, perhaps funding, thinking about societal influences, political influences, perhaps there's differences demographically across the country that you may be exploring. There may be technological advances or influences. People's personal values can influence different things. The environment might influence what you're discussing. It could be global impact, competitiveness, if you're talking about anything to do with business. Thinking about ethical concerns. We mentioned environment earlier, but ethical concerns as well. And of course, the media can have a huge influence on outcomes as well. So definitely when you're thinking about what influenced this, start to think about what could those different influences be. And the question, what else, is particularly important. If you think of what else as like peeling back layers of an onion. So you take the first layer of the onion, but we don't just stop there. Ask yourself what else, and peel that next layer of the onion back and see if that provides any more ideas or perspectives until you've really exhausted that. And as you develop and build your critical thinking skills, you'll be able to do more of that. Other questions include, how does it change over time, for example? How does it work in theory? Or maybe you'll think about how does that work in practice, or even compare the two. We're thinking about how one might influence the other. You might think about how it differs to different contexts, different environments, for example. Think about what other options may be available to you, and see if there are any variables which, if manipulated, will change the situation. So what would happen if something happened? And again, throughout all of that, I would encourage you that as you write, ask yourself, well, okay, why is this? What's influenced it? Is there anything else? Let's give you an example now then of analysis. We're using the Kumar example with regards to research again. So here our sentence, the purpose of research is to influence professional practice by Kumar. For example, this could include reviewing policies and procedures which could impact the outcomes relating to those associated with the context of the study. So let's see where our analysis is happening now. So here we've got our purpose. We've been quite clear here because we've even used the language, the purpose. It might be the aim. or the intention, for example, if you want to use different terminology. We've also got some information about how it impacts the outcomes here at the bottom as well. I've got another example here of analysis. I'm not going to read all of this, so take a moment to read this, pause the video to look, and then I'll share with you where some analysis is happening here. So that first paragraph then, there are a wide range of implications for social research. So here we are starting to explore why this is important. Implications can be positive, they can be negative. So it's another way of responding to benefits, for example, but we're starting to share why it's important. Now, if we look at that second paragraph here, nonetheless, research is not without its challenges. So we're really starting to think about the negative effects here without using the words negative. So again, we're starting to think what influences this, what influences research, for example. So as you can see, the sentences are starting to expand a lot more. And if you're writing this in an assignment, you'd start to introduce and synthesize alternative viewpoints to this as well. Okay, so we're just using Kumar here, but you can add additional ones in as well. In terms of evaluation, then, so pushing away towards those higher order thinking skills, you're starting to understand the implications of something. You're starting to make judgments based on the information that you've just provided. You can explain perhaps what's been learned, maybe make predictions or inferences from the argument you've presented. You can provide solutions or future recommendations, consider implications for practice, and make conclusions based on that analysis that you have done. So here, typical questions could include, what does this mean? Why is this important? What are the implications? How convincing is the overall argument? How successful is it? How and when can it be applied? What can be learnt? What should happen next? And what recommendations are there? So let's look at an example here. Again, I'm going to suggest that you stop the video now and take a moment to read through the paragraph. Okay, so we are, let's see where evaluation is happening here then. So we have got, so what? It's evident from the argument presented. Okay, so we're really explaining, what does this mean? We've also got some what next. So we've got what we really need to think about, that actually good research requires research to have. So it's explaining what we need to make that happen, what moving forward. So really here, this is a nice conclusion, bringing together all of the arguments presented as well through the description and analysis there. Now we've got another visual here for you to see if you like to see how that can work in another way. Again, from Plymouth University, with the description, with those questions here, linking to the typical, if you've looked at Bloom's taxonomy or Anderson and Crawford's work on thinking skills, moving from those lower order through to the higher order thinking skills. And then we've got your analysis and the typical questions that you would ask, moving to the evaluation as well. Now it's really important to think that actually it goes in cycles. You don't just stop once you've done the main parts. You will naturally talk about a topic, you'll do your analysis, have some evaluation there as well as you go along, and then you move to the next topic that you're discussing in your assignment, and you will continue, and then there will be a final conclusion near the end. Okay, so it is an iterative process. You keep going until you've explored all the topics, issues that you've been asked to explore. In terms of assignment, learning outcomes and assessment, I think it's worth bearing in mind. Obviously, think about what you are studying, what you've been given, but the type of critical thinking that is expected of you will certainly be dependent on the learning outcomes, the assignment guidelines, and the marking criteria that has been set for you. So it's really important to engage with your marking criteria and understand what you need to do for each of the different levels for those grades that you're looking for. The level and depth of critical thinking skills will certainly depend on what level of study that you're working at. So the requirements for a level 4 student, for example, typically in the first year, will differ to those working at level 6, moving through to usually the third year. And it's important to be guided by your lecturer as well. What you'll notice in your sessions, your lecturers really will be developing those critical thinking skills without perhaps necessarily explicitly saying that they are. And generally, in terms of marks, the accurateness of your knowledge, the critical thinking skills that you've applied in your writing, how you synthesise an argument with that range of credible sources, and how you present your work in written format will really come together and provide you those overall marks. In terms of references for further reading, then we'll encourage you to have a look at Cottrell's book and the link here for Plymouth University if you'd like to have a look at those images and the document further. So I hope this has given you a really good idea of what critical thinking is, and now it's time for you to start thinking about how you can utilise this in your own studies in terms of the wider reading that you do and how you bring your assignments together. Thank you for listening.